The scream tore through the winter darkness like a knife. And when Helena Zimmerman stumbled into the Silver Star Saloon just after midnight with blood streaking her torn dress and terror carved into her face, every man in that smoke-filled room knew something had gone terribly wrong at the Zimmerman homestead, 5 miles north of Kingfisher, Oklahoma. It was January of 1887, and the temperature had dropped so low that ice formed on the inside of window panes. But Helena was barefoot, her dark hair wild around her shoulders, her green eyes reflecting a horror that made even the hardest ranch hands shift uncomfortably in their seats. She gripped the doorframe with white knuckles, her breath coming in ragged gasps that sent clouds of vapor into the frigid air. "Wolves," she managed to say, her voice cracking. "They came again tonight. They killed my last cow. They are getting closer to the house every time." The saloon owner, a grizzled man named Pete who had seen his share of frontier hardships, hurried over with a blanket and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. He guided her to a chair near the potbelly stove, its iron sides glowing red with heat, and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her shaking hands. "How long has this been going on?" Pete asked gently. Helena took a sip of the coffee, wincing as the hot liquid burned her throat, but the warmth seemed to bring some clarity back to her eyes. "Every night for 2 weeks," she whispered. "Ever since my father died. They circle the house. They howl. Tonight they killed Bessie. She was all I had left for milk and butter. I heard her screaming, but by the time I got the rifle loaded, they had already torn her throat out." A tall figure stood up from a corner table, his movements deliberate and measured. Harrison Xavier had been nursing a whiskey while trying to forget another day of hard riding and harder losses. His ranch, the Triple X, had been struggling since cattle prices dropped the previous summer, and he had been considering heading further west to try his luck in Colorado. But something about the terror in this young woman's voice, something about the way she held herself despite the fear radiating from every fiber of her being, made him pause. He was 26 years old, weathered beyond his years by sun and wind and the brutal honesty of frontier life. His face was all hard angles beneath a 3-day growth of beard, his dark hair curling slightly over the collar of his worn leather coat. His eyes, a deep brown that could turn cold as river stones or warm as summer honey depending on his mood, studied Helena with an intensity that made her look up despite her distress. "Wolves do not usually hunt that close to human habitation," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble that carried authority. "Not unless they are desperate or something has disrupted their normal hunting grounds." Helena set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "I do not care why they are doing it. I just need them to stop. I cannot lose anything else. That homestead is all I have left of my family. My mother died when I was 12. My father broke his back building that place, and he died 3 weeks ago when his heart just gave out one morning while he was chopping wood. I buried him myself, because I could not afford to pay anyone to help." Her voice broke on the last word, and she looked away, clearly ashamed of showing such vulnerability in front of a room full of strangers. She was 22 years old, Harrison realized, and entirely alone in a territory that showed no mercy to the weak or unprepared. "How much land do you have?" Harrison found himself asking, though he could not quite explain why it mattered to him. 40 acres, Helena replied. "My father filed the claim in 1882. We have a small house, a barn, a chicken coop, and a well. Or we did. The wolves got most of the chickens last week. I have been sleeping in snatches, trying to keep watch, but I cannot stay awake every night. Tonight I fell asleep just after dusk, and when I woke up, Bessie was already screaming." She looked down at her hands, at the dirt and blood caked under her fingernails. I ran here because I could not stay there another minute. The wolves were still circling when I left. I could see their eyes reflecting the moonlight, dozens of them, just watching the house like they were waiting for something. Harrison felt something shift in his chest, something he had not experienced in years. It might have been compassion, or it might have been something more complicated, but whatever it was, it made him walk over to where Helena sat and crouch down so he could meet her eyes at level. "When is the next full moon?" he asked. Pete checked the almanac hanging on the wall behind the bar. 16 days from now, he announced. Harrison nodded slowly, calculations already forming in his mind. "If I started at first light, working from dawn to dusk every day, I could fence your entire property before then. It would not be fancy, but it would be solid enough to keep wolves out, especially if I built it tall and reinforced the weak points." Helena stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Harrison stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with the question because he did not have a good answer. "Because it needs to be done," he said finally. "And because no one should have to face something like that alone." The truth was more complicated than he wanted to admit, even to himself. There was something about Helena Zimmerman that called to something deep inside him. Something about the way she held her spine straight despite the fear. The way she had run through 5 miles of frozen darkness in bare feet, rather than give up her father's homestead without a fight. He recognized that kind of stubborn courage because he saw it in the mirror every morning when he shaved. "I cannot pay you," Helena said, her voice small but honest. "I have almost nothing left, maybe $20 saved, and that has to last me through the spring." "I am not asking for payment," Harrison replied. "I am asking for permission to help." Helena looked around the saloon, at the faces of men who had known her father, who had shared drinks and stories with him over the years, who had expressed sympathy at his funeral, but had not offered anything more substantial than condolences. Then she looked back at Harrison, at this stranger with hard eyes and gentle hands who was offering something that seemed too good to be true. "Why?" she asked again, needing to understand. Harrison met her gaze and felt that shift in his chest again. That strange tightening that might have been the beginning of something he had thought himself too practical to believe in. "Because 16 days from now, when that moon rises full and bright, I want you to be able to sleep through the night without fear. That seems like reason enough." Helena studied his face for a long moment, looking for deception or hidden motives, but all she saw was a tired man with honest eyes who seemed to mean every word he said. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she agreed. "You can fence my property, but I am going to help. It is my land, my responsibility, and I am not going to sit in the house while someone else does all the work." Harrison allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine expression of warmth he had shown since entering the saloon. "Fair enough. But first, you are going to put on some proper boots and sleep for a few hours. You will not be much help if you collapse from exhaustion or lose your toes to frostbite." Pete offered Helena his spare room above the saloon, and she accepted gratefully, too tired to argue. Harrison waited until she had gone upstairs before turning to the other men in the room. "Anyone have spare fencing materials they can sell cheap or loan?" he asked. "Posts, wire, anything that can be used to build a barrier." Several men exchanged glances, and then old Charlie, who ran the general store, spoke up. "I've got some wire that was ordered for a ranch that went under last fall. Never got paid for it. If you can cover the original cost, it is yours. I can also let you have posts at half price." "I will take it," Harrison said immediately, already calculating how much of his savings he would need to spend. The XXX was struggling, but he had enough set aside for emergencies, and somehow this qualified. Another rancher, a man named Douglas who owned property adjacent to the Zimmerman homestead, leaned forward. "I can spare 2 of my hands for a few days to help with the heavy work. Those wolves have been causing problems on my land too, though not as bad as what Helena is dealing with. If fencing her property pushes them further north, that is fine by me." Others chimed in with offers of tools, supplies, or labor, and by the time Harrison left the saloon an hour later, he had cobbled together enough resources to make the project feasible. The community spirit of Kingfisher had its limits, but when pushed, folks generally tried to take care of their own. Harrison rode back to the Triple X as the sky began to lighten in the east, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gray and pale blue. His breath and his horse's breath created twin clouds in the frigid air, and ice crystals sparkled on every surface like scattered diamonds. He had not slept, but adrenaline and purpose were driving him forward now, pushing away the exhaustion that had been his constant companion for months. At his ranch, he woke his foreman, an older cowboy named Samuel who had worked for Harrison's father before the elder Xavier had been killed in a stampede 5 years earlier. "I am going to be gone for the next 2 weeks, maybe more," Harrison explained as he gathered tools and supplies. "I need you to keep things running here. Just maintenance work, nothing fancy. Make sure the horses are fed and the water troughs do not freeze over." Samuel, who had known Harrison since he was a boy learning to ride, studied his boss with shrewd eyes. "This about that Zimmerman girl who came into town last night. Word travels fast, even in the middle of the night." "It is about someone who needs help," Harrison replied, not quite meeting Samuel's gaze. "Uh-huh," Samuel said, not bothering to hide his knowing grin. "You be careful out there, boss. Wolves are not the only dangerous thing in these parts." Harrison did not dignify that with a response. He loaded his wagon with tools, supplies, his bedroll, and enough food to last several days. Then he hitched up his 2 strongest horses and headed back toward Kingfisher just as the sun broke over the eastern horizon, flooding the frozen prairie with golden light. He found Helena at the general store, already dressed in practical work clothes and sturdy boots that looked like they had belonged to her father. They were too large for her, but she had stuffed the toes with newspaper and tied them tight. Her face was pale but determined, and she had pulled her dark hair back into a severe braid that hung down her back. "I thought I told you to sleep," Harrison said as he climbed down from the wagon. "I did sleep," Helena replied, "for 3 hours. That is more than I have managed most nights recently. Besides, daylight is wasting, and you said we have only 16 days. Harrison wanted to argue, but he recognized the set of her jaw, the stubborn angle of her chin. This was a woman who had buried her father alone and survived 2 weeks of nightly wolf attacks through sheer force of will. She was not going to be easily dissuaded. "All right," he agreed. "But if you start to fall over, I am making you rest. Deal?" "Deal," Helena said, and for the first time since he had seen her, she almost smiled. They loaded the wagon with fencing materials from the general store, adding to what Harrison had already brought from the Triple X. The weight was considerable, and the horses strained against the harness as they began the 5-mile journey to the Zimmerman homestead. Helena sat beside Harrison on the wagon seat, and they rode in companionable silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the jingle of harness, and the steady clopping of hooves on frozen ground. The landscape around them was harsh but beautiful, endless stretches of dormant prairie grass, punctuated by occasional stands of cottonwood trees, their bare branches reaching toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. "Thank you," Helena said finally, breaking the silence, "for doing this. For believing me. Some of the men in town think I am exaggerating, that it cannot be as bad as I claim, but you did not question it." Harrison kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I have seen what fear looks like, and I have seen what lying looks like. You are not lying." They fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now, less awkward and more comfortable. Harrison found himself acutely aware of Helena's presence beside him. The way she held herself upright despite her obvious exhaustion, the way her breath created small clouds in the cold air, the faint scent of soap and wood smoke that clung to her clothes. When they finally arrived at the Zimmerman homestead, Harrison understood immediately why the wolves had focused their attention here. The property sat in a slight depression, protected from the worst of the prairie winds but also isolated, surrounded by gently rolling hills that provided perfect cover for predators. The house was small but solidly built, constructed from prairie sod with a wooden frame and a roof that had been recently patched. The barn was in worse condition, listing slightly to one side, and the remains of Helena's cow lay in the frozen mud near the barn door, a grim testament to the previous night's attack. Harrison climbed down from the wagon and walked slowly around the perimeter of the property, studying the land with a practiced eye. 40 acres was a significant amount of ground to fence, especially in the middle of winter with frozen soil, but it was not impossible. The key would be efficiency and planning. "We will start with the house and barn," he announced, pulling out a notebook and pencil to sketch a rough map. "Build a tight perimeter around your immediate living area first, maybe 2 acres. That gives you a safe zone quickly. Then we expand outward section by section until we have the entire property enclosed." Helena nodded, studying his drawings with intelligent eyes. "That makes sense. But what about the gate? We will need a way to get in and out." 2 gates, Harrison said. "Main gate on the south side for wagons and horses, smaller gate on the north side for foot traffic, both reinforced and tall enough that wolves cannot jump over them." "Wolves can jump pretty high," Helena said quietly. "I know. We will build it higher." They worked through that first day with single-minded determination, laying out the initial perimeter and digging post holes in ground that fought them every inch of the way. The frozen earth was like iron, and they had to build fires in each hole location just to thaw the soil enough to make progress. It was brutal, exhausting work, and by the time the sun began to set, they had managed to set only a dozen posts. Helena insisted on cooking dinner for them, disappearing into the house and emerging with bowls of venison stew that steamed in the cold air. They ate sitting on the wagon tailgate, too tired to talk much, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and purple. "They will come again tonight," Helena said as the last light faded. "They always do." "I know," Harrison replied. "I am staying." Helena turned to look at him, surprise evident in her expression. "You do not have to do that. The house only has 1 bedroom, and I am not offering anything more than a meal and gratitude." Harrison felt heat creep up his neck at the implication. "I will sleep in the barn," he said firmly, "with my rifle. If the wolves come, I want to get a good look at what we are dealing with." Helena looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion and relief warred on her face, and relief won. "Thank you," she said simply. Harrison set up his bedroll in the barn loft, positioning himself where he had a clear view of the property through gaps in the weathered boards. He loaded his rifle, a Winchester .73 that had belonged to his father, and settled in to wait. The wolves came just after midnight, exactly as Helena had predicted. Harrison heard them before he saw them, the soft padding of paws on frozen ground, the low whines and growls of a pack communicating. Then shapes began to emerge from the darkness, dozens of them, circling the property with eerie intelligence. These were not normal wolves. Harrison had hunted wolves before, had seen them in their natural habitat, and they did not behave like this. These animals moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of something deeper than simple hunger. They tested the perimeter methodically, looking for weaknesses, and when they found the gaps in the fence line that Harrison had not yet closed, several of them ventured closer to the house. Harrison took careful aim and fired, the crack of the rifle shattering the night silence. One of the wolves yelped and retreated, and the entire pack scattered, disappearing into the darkness so quickly it was almost as if they had never been there. Almost immediately the house door opened, and Helena appeared with her own rifle, her nightgown covered by her father's old coat. "Did you hit one?" she called out. "Just winged it," Harrison called back. "They are gone now, but they will be back." Helena walked toward the barn, her breath creating clouds in the moonlight. When she reached the base of the ladder to the loft, she looked up at him. "You saw them then. You saw how many there are, how they move." "I saw," Harrison confirmed. "That is not normal wolf behavior." "I know," Helena said, and there was something in her voice that made Harrison climb down the ladder to stand beside her. In the moonlight, her face was pale, her eyes enormous and dark. "My father said something before he died. I thought it was just the pain talking, the fever, but now I am not so sure." "What did he say?" Harrison asked gently. Helena wrapped her arms around herself, though whether from cold or fear, Harrison could not tell. "He said the wolves were payment for something he did a long time ago. He said he had taken something that did not belong to him, and now the wolves had come to collect the debt. He died before he could explain what he meant." Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Do you have any idea what he might have been talking about?" "No," Helena admitted. "My father was a good man, a godly man. He never spoke of his life before we came to Oklahoma. I always assumed there was nothing remarkable to tell, that he was just another homesteader looking for a fresh start." "Everyone has secrets," Harrison said quietly. "That does not mean he was not a good man. Sometimes good people make mistakes." Helena looked up at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I just want it to stop. I do not care what he did or did not do. I just want to be able to live here without being terrified every night." Without thinking about it, Harrison reached out and pulled her into an embrace, and after a moment of stiffness, Helena relaxed against him, her head resting against his chest. They stood like that for several minutes, two people finding comfort in shared warmth and the simple act of not being alone. "We will finish the fence," Harrison said into her hair. "Whatever your father did or did not do, whatever reason these wolves have for haunting this place, we will make it right. You have my word." Helena pulled back slightly, looking up at him with an expression that was part gratitude, part something else, something that made Harrison's heart beat faster. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, but this time the question carried a different weight. Harrison looked down at her, at this woman he had known for less than 24 hours, but who already seemed to occupy far more space in his thoughts than was reasonable. "Because when you walked into that saloon last night, you looked like you were ready to fight the entire world alone if that was what it took to survive. And I thought that was just about the bravest damn thing I had ever seen. And I thought that if you were willing to fight that hard, the least I could do was stand beside you." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken things, with possibilities and maybes and the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Then Helena stood on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to Harrison's cheek, her lips cold against his wind-burned skin. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she turned and hurried back to the house before he could respond, leaving him standing alone in the moonlight with his heart pounding and his mind racing. The next morning arrived far too early, bringing with it Douglas and his 2 ranch hands as promised. The addition of 3 more workers made an enormous difference, and by the end of the second day, they had completed the inner perimeter around the house and barn, creating a safe zone enclosed by a fence 7 feet tall, constructed from sturdy posts and multiple strands of tightly stretched wire. Douglas proved to be a font of local knowledge, and over lunch on the third day, he shared a story that made both Harrison and Helena pay close attention. There was an Apache camp about 20 miles north of here back in '83, Douglas said around a mouthful of bread. Small group, maybe 20 people, mostly women and children with a few old men. They had broken away from a larger band that was being forced onto a reservation, just wanted to live peaceful on their own land. Your father knew about them, Helena. He used to trade with them sometimes, brought them supplies in exchange for beadwork and tanned hides. Helena leaned forward, interest clear on her face. I remember some of that. My mother used to have a beautiful deerskin dress with intricate beadwork. She said it was a gift from an Apache woman. Douglas nodded. Well, one winter, the Army decided that camp was too close to white settlements. They raided it in the middle of the night, killed most of the men, and took the women and children to the reservation by force. But there was a medicine man with them, an old man who was supposed to have powerful magic. Story goes that he cursed the land before he died, said that any white man who had profited from taking Indian land would pay with blood and fear until the debt was settled. Harrison felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Did my father profit from that land? Not directly, Douglas said carefully. But when the Apache were removed, their camping grounds became available for homesteading. Your father filed his claim about 6 months later. Could be coincidence, could be something else. Helena had gone very pale. The wolves did not start coming until after my father died. Like I said, Douglas repeated, could be coincidence, but nobody really believed that. That night, as Harrison kept watch again from the barn loft, he found himself thinking about debts and curses, about the way history had a habit of demanding payment from the innocent, along with the guilty. He thought about Helena, trying to survive on land that might be cursed through no fault of her own, and he felt anger kindle in his chest at the unfairness of it all. The wolves came again, but this time they could not get past the inner fence. They paced and circled, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like dozens of small lanterns, but they did not howl, did not make any sound at all. That silence was somehow more unnerving than any amount of noise would have been. Helena joined him in the loft after midnight, unable to sleep with the sound of paws padding just beyond her windows. She sat beside him on the rough wooden planks, wrapped in a quilt, and together they watched the wolves circle. "You believe in curses?" she asked quietly. Harrison considered the question carefully. "I believe that actions have consequences," he said finally. "And I believe that sometimes those consequences take time to manifest. Whether you call that a curse or just the way the world works, I suppose that is a matter of perspective." "My father was not a bad man," Helena said fiercely. "He might have made mistakes, might have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but he was good to my mother and to me. He worked hard and hurt no one." "I believe you," Harrison said. "But good people can still make choices that have bad consequences. That does not erase the good they do, but it also does not erase the bad." Helena was quiet for a long time, watching the wolves. Then she said, "If this is a curse, if these wolves are here because of something my father did, then how do we stop it? Fencing the property might keep them out, but it does not address the root cause. What if they just keep coming night after night for years?" "Then we will deal with that when it happens," Harrison said firmly. "First things first, we finish the fence. We give you safety and security and the ability to sleep through the night. Everything else we figure out as we go." Helena turned to look at him, and in the dim light her face was all shadows and plains, beautiful in a way that made Harrison's chest ache. "You keep saying we," she observed, "like you are planning to be around for a while." Harrison met her gaze steadily. "Is that all right?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning, and Harrison watched as Helena processed it. Saw the moment she understood that he was asking for more than just permission to finish a fence, that he was asking if she could imagine a future that included him in some capacity. "Yes," she said finally, the word barely above a whisper. "That is more than all right." The days began to blur together after that, measured in fence posts and wire stretched tight, in cold mornings and colder nights, in shared meals and stolen glances. Douglas's ranch hands stayed for a week before returning to their own work, but by then, the fence had expanded significantly, enclosing nearly half of the property. Harrison and Helena fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side from dawn until dusk. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes and fears and dreams. Harrison learned that Helena had always wanted to be a teacher, that she loved books and learning with a passion that her frontier life had made difficult to pursue. Helena learned that Harrison had inherited the Triple X when he was barely 21, that he had been struggling to keep it afloat ever since, that he sometimes felt crushed by the weight of responsibility and expectation. "Why do you keep it if it makes you so unhappy?" Helena asked one afternoon as they dug yet another post hole. Harrison paused, leaning on his shovel. "Because it was my father's dream. Because giving up feels like admitting defeat. Because I do not know what else I would do with my life if I was not a rancher." "You could be anything," Helena said firmly. "You are smart and capable, and you work harder than anyone I have ever met. If you wanted to do something different, you could." Harrison looked at her, at the faith shining in her eyes, and felt something shift inside him. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just needed a reason to make the ranch work, something to fight for besides just survival." The meaning behind his words was clear, and Helena blushed but did not look away. They had not kissed, had not formally acknowledged the growing attraction between them, but it was there in every glance, every accidental touch, every moment of comfortable silence. On the 10th day, as the sun set in a blaze of crimson and gold, they finished fencing the eastern boundary. Harrison stood back and surveyed their work with satisfaction. 6 more days until the full moon, and they were ahead of schedule. Barring any major problems, they would complete the entire perimeter with time to spare. That night, emboldened by their progress and the warmth of accomplishment, Helena invited Harrison to have dinner inside the house rather than eating outside on the wagon. It was a small thing, but it felt significant, like crossing an invisible threshold. The interior of the house was simple but clean, the walls lined with books and small treasures that spoke of lives lived and lost. Harrison noticed a tintype photograph on the mantel, showing a younger Helena with her parents, all 3 of them smiling at the camera with that slightly stiff expression people got when trying to hold still for the long exposure. "That was taken the year before my mother died," Helena said, noticing his attention. "We had traveled to Oklahoma City for supplies, and there was a photographer set up in the town square. It cost $2, which was a fortune to us then, but my father insisted. He said some things were worth more than money." Harrison studied the photograph, seeing in Helena's father's face the same stubborn determination he recognized in his daughter. "He looks like a man who loved his family." "He did," Helena agreed softly. "Whatever mistakes he made, that was never in doubt." They ate the dinner Helena had prepared, a simple meal of beans and cornbread with a precious bit of salt pork for flavor. It was not fancy, but it tasted like the best meal Harrison had eaten in years, seasoned as it was with good company and genuine warmth. After dinner, they sat by the small fireplace, drinking coffee and talking in low voices while the wind howled outside. The wolves had not come yet, but both of them knew it was only a matter of time. "Can I ask you something personal?" Helena said after a long stretch of comfortable silence. "Of course," Harrison replied. "Have you ever been in love, before, I mean, with anyone?" Harrison considered the question, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I thought I was once. When I was 19, there was a girl in town, daughter of the banker. She was pretty and cultured, and I thought she represented everything I was supposed to want. But when my father died and I inherited a struggling ranch instead of a successful one, she made it clear that her interest had been in my prospects rather than in me. That taught me to be more careful about who I gave my heart to." "That must have hurt," Helena said sympathetically. "It did, at the time. But looking back, I think it was more wounded pride than a broken heart. Real love is supposed to be something more than just attraction and convenience, is it not? It is supposed to be about seeing someone completely, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway." Helena was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have never been in love. There have been men who expressed interest, but my father was protective and I was picky. I always thought love would feel like something momentous, like lightning striking. But now I am wondering if maybe it is more like a slow sunrise, something that creeps up on you gradually, until suddenly the whole world is illuminated and you cannot remember what the darkness was like." Harrison turned to look at her, and their eyes met across the small space between their chairs. The firelight played across her face, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the line of her jaw, the soft fullness of her lips. "Helena," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She stood up and moved to where he sat, and Harrison rose to meet her. They stood facing each other, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body, could see the flutter of her pulse in her throat. "I know we have not known each other very long," Helena said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know this might be foolish, that we might just be caught up in the intensity of the situation. But I cannot stop thinking about you. Every morning when I wake up, my first thought is that you are here. Every night when I go to sleep, my last thought is gratitude that you stayed." "That is not foolish," Harrison said, reaching up to cup her face gently in his calloused hands. "That is exactly how I feel too." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Helena rose to meet him instead. Their lips touched softly at first, tentative and questioning, and then with growing confidence and heat as weeks of attraction and longing found release in that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you, Helena Zimmerman. I probably started falling that first night when you walked into the saloon looking terrified but refusing to break. I just did not realize it until now." Tears gleamed in Helena's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too, Harrison Xavier, and it terrifies me almost as much as the wolves do because I cannot bear the thought of losing something else that matters." "You will not lose me," Harrison promised. "I am not going anywhere." They kissed again, longer and deeper, and when they finally separated, the wolves had begun to arrive outside, their silent vigil a stark reminder of the reality they still faced. But for the first time since this ordeal began, Helena did not look afraid as she listened to the soft padding of paws beyond her walls. She looked defiant, like a woman who had found something worth fighting for and had no intention of letting it go. The next 5 days passed in a blur of fence building and stolen moments. They worked during the day, making steady progress on the remaining perimeter, and spent their evenings together in the house, talking and kissing and learning the geography of each other's hearts. Harrison told her about his dreams of expanding the Triple X, of breeding horses instead of cattle, because he had always found horses more interesting and rewarding to work with. Helena told him about her secret desire to open a school in Kingfisher, to teach children to read and write and think critically about the world. "We could do both," Harrison said one evening as they sat close together on the small sofa. "The Triple X is big enough to support horse breeding if I sell off most of the cattle. And there is a small house on the property that my parents used to rent out before my father died. It has been sitting empty for years, but it could be converted into a schoolhouse easily enough." Helena's eyes lit up with excitement. "Are you serious? You would really consider that?" "I am serious about building a life with you," Harrison said simply. "Whatever form that takes, whatever dreams we want to pursue, I am willing to work toward them, together." Helena kissed him then, pouring all her joy and hope and love into that gesture, and Harrison held her close, marveling at how completely his life had changed in less than 2 weeks. On the 15th day, with the full moon rising the next evening, they set the final fence post and stretched the last strand of wire. The entire 40 acres of the Zimmerman homestead was now enclosed behind a 7-foot fence that represented weeks of backbreaking labor and stubborn determination. Harrison walked the complete perimeter one last time as the sun set, checking for weak points or gaps, but the fence was solid. The gates were installed and functional, both tall and reinforced as promised. Whatever happened when the moon rose full and bright tomorrow night, Helena would be safe behind these walls. When he returned to the house, he found Helena standing in the yard, staring at the completed fence with an expression of wonder on her face. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and the smile that broke across her face was like sunshine after a storm. "You did it," she said, her voice full of awe. "You actually did it. You built a fence around my entire property in 16 days. "We did it," Harrison corrected, pulling her into his arms. "You worked just as hard as I did, maybe harder because you were carrying the weight of fear along with everything else." Helena buried her face against his chest, and Harrison felt her shoulders shake with what might have been laughter or tears or some combination of both. "I cannot believe it is really finished. I keep expecting to wake up and find this was all a dream, that I am still alone and terrified with wolves circling every night." "It is not a dream," Harrison assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "The fence is real. Your safety is real. And I am real, and I am not leaving unless you tell me to go." Helena pulled back to look up at him, her eyes fierce. "Do not even joke about that. If you try to leave now, I will fight you." Harrison laughed, a genuine sound of joy that surprised him with its intensity. "Good to know. Though I should probably tell you that I am hoping for something more permanent than just staying around. I am hoping you might consider marrying me." The words were out before he could second-guess them, before practical concerns about timing and propriety could make him hesitate. It had been less than 3 weeks since they met, which by any reasonable measure was too soon to propose marriage. But nothing about their circumstances had been reasonable, and Helena did not seem to think his proposal was premature. Her face lit up with such radiant happiness that Harrison felt his breath catch in his throat. "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, I will marry you. 1,000 times yes." Harrison kissed her then, there in the yard with the completed fence surrounding them and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. It was a kiss full of promise and commitment, the kind of kiss that marked the beginning of something lasting and true. "We should probably tell people," Helena said when they finally came up for air. And we should do it properly with a minister and witnesses and everything official." "We will," Harrison agreed. "But first, let us get through tomorrow night. Let us see what happens when the full moon rises and the wolves come back. Once we know you are truly safe, then we will start planning our future." That night, they kept watch together from the barn loft, neither of them willing to sleep when the final test was so close at hand. They talked in whispers about everything and nothing, making plans for their wedding, for combining the Zimmerman homestead with the Triple X, for all the years they hoped stretched out before them. The 16th day dawned clear and cold. The winter sun glittering off frost-covered prairie in a display that was almost painfully beautiful. Harrison and Helena spent the day making final preparations, double-checking the fence, securing the gates, and generally trying to keep busy enough that nervous anticipation did not overwhelm them. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they positioned themselves in the barn loft once more, rifles loaded and ready, waiting to see if all their work had been enough. The moon rose huge and silver on the eastern horizon, and with its arrival came the wolves. They appeared from the hills like shadows given form, dozens of them moving with that same eerie coordination Helena had described. But this time, when they reached the fence line, they stopped. The pack circled the perimeter, testing the fence, pushing against posts, trying to find weaknesses. But the fence held firm, and after several minutes of fruitless investigation, the wolves sat back on their haunches and simply watched the house. Helena gripped Harrison's hand tightly, her nails digging into his palm, but she did not speak, barely even breathed as they watched the standoff unfold. Then, from the center of the pack, an enormous wolf emerged, larger than any natural wolf Harrison had ever seen. Its fur was silver-gray, almost luminous in the moonlight, and its eyes held an intelligence that made the hair on Harrison's arms stand on end. The great wolf walked slowly toward the fence, stopping just inches from the wire. It lifted its head and looked directly at the barn, directly at the loft where Harrison and Helena hid, and Harrison had the uncanny sensation that it could see them as clearly as they saw it. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wolf and the human stared at each other across the distance, across the barrier that represented protection and separation, and the breaking of whatever cycle had brought the pack here in the first place. Then the great wolf threw back its head and howled, a sound so mournful and so beautiful that it brought tears to Helena's eyes. The rest of the pack joined in, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to contain all the sadness and loss and injustice of history, all the pain of people displaced and promises broken. The howling went on for several minutes, filling the night with sound, and then, as abruptly as it had started, it stopped. The great wolf looked at the house one last time, and then it turned and loped away toward the hills. The rest of the pack followed, moving as one, and within moments, they had disappeared into the darkness as completely as if they had never existed. Helena released a breath she had not realized she was holding. "Are they gone? Really gone?" "I think so," Harrison said, hardly daring to believe it himself. "I think the fence worked, or maybe it was more than just the fence. Maybe it was the act of building it, of standing your ground and refusing to be driven away. Maybe that was enough to break whatever hold this place had on the pack." They stayed in the loft for another hour, watching and waiting, but the wolves did not return. Finally, as midnight approached, Harrison climbed down and walked cautiously around the property, checking for any sign of the pack, but there was nothing. Even their tracks seemed to have vanished, as if they had been swallowed by the prairie itself. Helena met him in the yard, her face questioning, and Harrison nodded. "They are gone. I do not know if it is permanent, but for tonight at least, You are safe." Helena threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time, and Harrison held her tight, silently offering thanks to whatever power had decided that enough was enough, that this young woman had suffered plenty and deserved peace. They went inside the house together, and for the first time in weeks, Helena slept through the entire night without waking once, secure in the knowledge that the fence held and the wolves were gone. The wolves never returned. As the weeks passed, and winter began its slow retreat before the advance of spring, life settled into a new rhythm for Helena and Harrison. They were married in late February in a simple ceremony at the Kingfisher Church, with half the town in attendance and Pete from the Silver Star Saloon serving as best man. Helena wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved in a cedar chest, and carried wildflowers that Douglas's wife had somehow coaxed into blooming despite the lingering cold. Harrison wore a new suit purchased specifically for the occasion, though he felt stiff and uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when he saw Helena walking toward him down the church aisle, her face radiant with joy, all his discomfort vanished. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and the fact that she had chosen him, that she was willingly binding her life to his, felt like the greatest blessing he could have imagined. They spoke their vows in clear, firm voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other through whatever trials life might bring. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed his bride with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The reception was held at the Silver Star Saloon, which Pete had decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, and a level of enthusiasm that surprised everyone who knew his normally gruff demeanor. There was music and dancing and food, and for one perfect afternoon, the harsh realities of frontier life were forgotten in favor of celebration and joy. Late in the evening, as the party showed no signs of slowing, Harrison and Helena slipped away, riding back to the Zimmerman homestead under a sky full of stars. The fence gleamed silver in the moonlight, a testament to their determination and their love, and as they passed through the main gate, Helena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness and home that she had been missing since her father died. They consummated their marriage that night with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed. Harrison was patient and gentle, taking his time to learn what brought Helena pleasure, and Helena was surprised by her own boldness, by the way her body responded to his touch with an eagerness that felt entirely natural. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that had belonged to Helena's parents, talking in whispers about the future they were building together. "I want to start combining our properties soon," Harrison said, trailing his fingers along Helena's arm in a gesture that was becoming comfortably familiar. "Not right away, but in the next few months. We can move the best stock from the XXX here, start the breeding program I told you about." "And the schoolhouse?" Helena asked, hope clear in her voice. "And the schoolhouse," Harrison confirmed. "We will need to make some repairs to that old rental house, but the structure is sound. By fall, if we work hard, you could have your school up and running." Helena kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you, Harrison Xavier. I think I knew it that first night when you offered to build my fence without asking for anything in return. But every day since then, I have loved you more." "I love you too, Helena Xavier," Harrison replied, the sound of her new name on his lips filling him with profound satisfaction. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that you did not make a mistake by marrying me." Spring arrived in earnest in March, transforming the prairie from dormant brown to vibrant green seemingly overnight. Harrison officially moved his operation to the Zimmerman property, which they began calling the Double X Ranch to reflect the merger of their two lives and lands. Samuel, Harrison's foreman, came along, and together the three of them worked to improve the facilities and prepare for the horse breeding operation. True to his word, Harrison set aside time and resources to convert the old rental house into a schoolhouse. Helena threw herself into the project with enthusiasm, whitewashing walls, building shelves for books, and creating lesson plans for the students she hoped to teach. Word spread through Kingfisher and the surrounding area that Helena Xavier was opening a school, and by the time fall arrived, she had 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Some came from town, riding in on ponies or being dropped off by parents in wagons. Others came from the scattered homesteads that dotted the prairie, eager for the education that had been unavailable to them before. Helena proved to be a natural teacher, patient and encouraging but firm when necessary. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also history and geography and natural sciences, determined to give her students the broadest education possible within the constraints of frontier life. Harrison would sometimes stop by the schoolhouse during lunch, ostensibly to check on repairs or maintenance, but really just to watch his wife in her element. Seeing her interact with the children, seeing the way her face lit up when a struggling student finally grasped a difficult concept, made his chest tight with love and pride. The horse breeding operation also flourished under Harrison's careful management. He had a good eye for quality and a gentle hand with the animals, and word began to spread that the Double X Ranch produced horses that were smart, strong, and reliable. By the end of the first year, he had more orders than he could reasonably fill, a problem he solved by hiring 2 additional hands and expanding his breeding stock. Life was good, better than either Harrison or Helena had dared to hope during those dark days when wolves circled every night and the future seemed uncertain. They worked hard during the day and fell into bed exhausted every night, content in the life they were building together. In October, almost exactly 9 months after their wedding, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She broke the news to Harrison one evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if unable to process what she had said. Then a smile spread across his face, so wide and genuine that it transformed his usually serious expression into something almost boyish. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Helena confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Sometime in early May, according to my calculations." Harrison was out of his chair in an instant, pulling Helena into his arms and spinning her around despite her protests that he should be careful. "This is the best news," he said, kissing her thoroughly. "The absolute best news." "You are happy then?" Helena asked, though the answer was obvious. "I am more than happy," Harrison replied. "I am overwhelmed, I am grateful, I am terrified, I am everything all at once." Helena understood exactly what he meant. The prospect of bringing a child into the world, of being responsible for another life, was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. But they would face it together, the same way they had faced every challenge so far. The pregnancy progressed normally, though Helena continued teaching until late March when her swelling belly made it difficult to move around the classroom comfortably. Her students were disappointed to see her take leave, but Harrison had arranged for a substitute teacher from Oklahoma City to finish out the school year, ensuring that the children's education did not suffer. Helena spent the last weeks of her pregnancy preparing the nursery, a small room off the main bedroom that Harrison had painted a cheerful yellow and filled with a handmade cradle, a chest for baby clothes, and a rocking chair where she could sit and nurse. In early May, as wildflowers bloomed across the prairie in a riot of color, Helena went into labor. Harrison rode at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife from Kingfisher, and by the time they returned, Helena was well into the grips of hard labor, gritting her teeth against the pain and breathing in the pattern the midwife had taught her weeks earlier. The labor lasted 8 hours of pain and fear and stubborn determination. Harrison stayed by Helena's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping the sweat from her forehead, offering words of encouragement when she was certain she could not endure another minute. And then, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being evicted from his warm, comfortable home. The midwife cleaned him quickly and placed him on Helena's chest, and both parents stared at this tiny, perfect human they had created with a sense of awe that bordered on religious. "He is perfect," Helena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Harrison, look at him. He is absolutely perfect." Harrison could not speak past the lump in his throat. He reached out with one finger to stroke the baby's tiny hand, and when miniature fingers wrapped around his larger one, gripping tight, he felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "What should we name him?" Helena asked, looking up at her husband with exhausted but happy eyes. They had discussed names extensively during the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one they both loved. But looking at his son now, at the way his tiny face scrunched up when he yawned, Harrison knew exactly what felt right. "Henry," he said, "after your father, Henry Jacob Xavier." Helena's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to name him after your father." "My father would have insisted on honoring yours," Harrison said firmly. "Your father gave me you, even if he did not know it at the time. His legacy lives on in this homestead, in the land we built a life on. It feels right to carry his name into the next generation." "Henry Jacob Xavier," Helena repeated, testing the name. "I love it, and I love you." "I love you too," Harrison replied, kissing her forehead gently. "Thank you for this gift, for our son, for our life together." Young Henry proved to be a healthy, if demanding, baby. He nursed vigorously and slept in fits and starts, keeping both parents awake for weeks as they adjusted to the rhythms of parenthood. But neither of them complained, too enchanted by this small person who was half Helena and half Harrison, and entirely his own. As the months passed, Henry grew and developed, hitting all his milestones right on schedule. He smiled early, laughed often, and showed signs of having inherited his father's serious nature and his mother's curious intellect. When he was 6 months old, Helena returned to teaching, setting up a cradle in the corner of the schoolhouse so she could keep Henry close while she worked. The older students were delighted to have a baby in the classroom, taking turns gently rocking the cradle when Henry fussed, and celebrating his achievements as if they were their own. Life continued its steady rhythm through the next several years. The Double X Ranch prospered, building a reputation that extended well beyond Oklahoma territory. Helena's school grew, requiring the addition of a second room and an assistant teacher, and Henry grew from baby to toddler to bright, energetic boy, his laughter filling the house with joy. When Henry was 3, Helena became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the spring of 1891 they welcomed their daughter into the world. They named her Anna Grace Xavier, and she was as different from her brother as day from night. Where Henry was serious and contemplative, Anna was impulsive and passionate. Where Henry preferred books and quiet activities, Anna wanted to be outside, chasing chickens and climbing trees and getting into every kind of mischief imaginable. Harrison and Helena watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bemusement, marveling at how two people could create such distinct and wonderful individuals. "You ever miss the quiet?" Helena asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Henry teach Anna how to identify different bird calls. "The days when it was just the two of us." Harrison considered the question, then shook his head. "I miss the simplicity sometimes," he admitted. "But I would not trade this for anything. Our life is noisy and chaotic and exhausting, and it is also the best thing I could have imagined." Helena leaned against his shoulder, content. "I feel the same way. Though I do sometimes think about those early days, when you were building the fence and we were falling in love. Those felt like the most intense weeks of my life, like everything was heightened and urgent." "It was urgent," Harrison said, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "We were fighting for your survival, for your home, for your future. But we did not know then that we were also fighting for this." He gestured to their children, to the house and barn and fields that represented years of hard work and love. "We were fighting for a family we had not even imagined yet." "The wolves never came back," Helena said, something she had observed countless times over the years but still felt compelled to mention. "Not once since that last night." "I know," Harrison replied. "Sometimes I wonder if we broke the curse, if building the fence and refusing to abandon the land was enough to settle whatever debt your father owed. Or maybe the wolves were never really about your father at all. Maybe they were a test, a way of seeing if we were strong enough to deserve this land and this life." "Maybe," Helena agreed. "Or maybe they were just wolves and we got lucky." But neither of them really believed that. There had been too much strangeness, too much intelligence in the pack's behavior, for it to be explained away by natural causes. Whatever the wolves had been, whatever purpose they had served, they were gone now, leaving behind only memories and a fence that still stood tall and strong around the property. As the years continued to pass, the Double X Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. Harrison's horses were sought after throughout Oklahoma and into neighboring states, prized for their intelligence and temperament. Helena's school grew to accommodate nearly 40 students, requiring a third teacher and plans for a new, larger building in town. Henry and Anna grew into capable young adults, both inheriting their parents' work ethic and values. Henry showed an aptitude for animal husbandry and began working alongside his father full-time after finishing his education. Anna surprised everyone by declaring her intention to become a veterinarian, a field traditionally dominated by men, but one she pursued with characteristic determination. In 1905, on a warm spring evening very much like the one when Harrison and Helena had first married, the family gathered on the porch to celebrate the completion of the new schoolhouse in Kingfisher. It was a substantial building, 2 stories tall with room for over 100 students, and it bore a plaque that read Helena Xavier Memorial School in honor of Helena's years of dedicated service to education. Helena had protested the name, saying she was not dead and did not need a memorial, but the town council had insisted. She had transformed education in Kingfisher, had opened doors of opportunity for countless children, and they wanted to recognize her contribution in a permanent way. Now, sitting surrounded by her family, Helena felt a deep sense of contentment and gratitude. She was 51 years old, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Harrison, at 55, had his own share of gray hair and weathered skin, but his eyes were still the same warm brown she had fallen in love with all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, noticing his wife's contemplative expression. "I am thinking about that night in the saloon," Helena said. "When I ran in terrified and barefoot and you offered to build me a fence. I am thinking about how I could never have imagined this life, this family, this happiness. I thought I was just trying to survive. I did not know I was about to start truly living." Harrison took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after nearly 20 years of marriage. "I am thinking about the same thing," he admitted. "About how I walked into that saloon planning to get drunk and forget my problems for a few hours. And I walked out having found the solution to every problem I did not even know I had." Henry and Anna, who had heard various versions of their parents' courtship story throughout their lives, exchanged amused glances. Their mother's dramatic arrival at the saloon, their father's improbable promise to build a fence in 16 days, the mysterious wolves that disappeared once the fence was complete, it all had the quality of a fairy tale, romantic and slightly unbelievable. But they had the fence as proof, still standing strong after all these years. And they had their parents' obvious love, the way Harrison still looked at Helena as if she were the most fascinating person in any room, the way Helena's face lit up whenever Harrison entered her field of vision. "Tell us about the wolves again," Anna requested, as she had countless times throughout her childhood. "The big silver one that howled and then just left." Helena and Harrison exchanged glances, and Helena began the story as she always did, describing the fear and isolation she had felt, the seemingly impossible task Harrison had undertaken, the night when everything changed. As she spoke, the sun set slowly over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its voice high and lonesome, but it was just a natural sound, nothing ominous or threatening. The fence still surrounded the property, though sections of it had been replaced or repaired over the years. New gates had been added as the ranch expanded, but the original perimeter that Harrison had built in those frantic 16 days remained largely intact, a permanent reminder of where their story began. When Helena finished her tale as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge, Anna sighed contentedly. "I want a love story like that someday," she said. "Something dramatic and romantic and true." "I hope you find it," Helena said sincerely. "Though perhaps with fewer wolves involved." They all laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics, to plans for the ranch and the new school, to Henry's upcoming marriage to a young woman from a neighboring homestead, to Anna's applications to veterinary programs. Later that night, after the children had gone to bed and Helena and Harrison were alone in the room they had shared for 2 decades, they stood at the window looking out over the moonlit prairie. "You have any regrets?" Helena asked quietly. "Any wishes that things had been different?" Harrison pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every moment of hardship led me to you. How could I regret that?" "I feel the same way," Helena said. "Even the wolves, even the fear and the struggle, it all brought us together. It all gave us this life." They stood like that for a long time, 2 people who had fought for their happiness and one who had built something lasting and true from desperate circumstances and unlikely timing. The fence that had saved Helena's life and brought them together still stood, a silent guardian marking the boundaries of their world. The wolves that had once threatened everything were long gone, vanished into memory and legend. And the love that had sparked during 16 days of frantic work and stolen glances had grown into something deep and unshakable, a foundation upon which an entire life had been built. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under a vast expanse of stars, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of the past and promises for the future. And inside the house on the Double X Ranch, Helena and Harrison Xavier held each other close, grateful for every moment that had led them to this place, to this love, to this life they had created together against all odds. The years continued to roll forward, bringing with them the joys and challenges that mark any well-lived life. Henry married his sweetheart in a ceremony held at the ranch, and within 2 years, Harrison and Helena became grandparents to twin boys who inherited their grandfather's serious nature and their grandmother's love of learning. Anna defied expectations and was accepted into a veterinary program in Kansas City, becoming one of the first women in the state to pursue that profession. She returned to Kingfisher after completing her education and opened a practice that served the surrounding ranches and homesteads, earning respect through her skill and dedication. The Double X Ranch continued to thrive under the combined management of Harrison and Henry, with Anna contributing her veterinary expertise to maintain the health of their breeding stock. The operation became a true family enterprise, with everyone contributing their unique talents to the whole. Helena eventually retired from daily teaching, though she remained on the school board and continued to tutor struggling students in her home. She also wrote a series of primers for frontier education that were adopted by schools throughout Oklahoma and into neighboring territories, ensuring that her impact extended far beyond the immediate community. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Helena with a new gate for the property, this one ornate and beautiful, made from wrought iron with their initials worked into the design along with images of horses and books, representing their shared passions. He installed it himself at the main entrance, replacing the functional but plain gate that had served for decades. Helena wept when she saw it, overcome by the thoughtfulness of the gesture and by the reminder that after a quarter-century together, Harrison still looked for ways to show his love. "I wanted something that would last beyond us," Harrison explained as he held her. "Something that our grandchildren's grandchildren will see and know that this place was built on love as much as sweat and determination." They stood together looking at the new gate, at the way it framed the view of their home and land, at the way the afternoon sun made the iron glow warm and golden. "We should have a party," Helena decided. "A proper celebration with everyone we care about. We have so much to be grateful for." They held the party on a perfect June day, inviting everyone from Kingfisher and the surrounding area. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by friends and neighbors. There was music and dancing and laughter, and speeches that praised Harrison and Helena's contributions to the community. Pete from the Silver Star Saloon, now well into his 70s but still spry, stood up and told the story of the night Helena had burst into his establishment, terrified and desperate. He talked about Harrison's immediate response, about the way the entire town had rallied to support the fence-building effort. "I have seen a lot in my years," Pete said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "But I never saw anything quite like watching these two fall in love while fighting for survival. They remind us all that the best things in life often come from the hardest struggles, and that courage and determination can overcome just about any obstacle." The crowd applauded, and Harrison and Helena stood together, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder, both of them moved by the outpouring of affection and respect. As the sun began to set and the party wound down, their grandchildren begged for the wolf story one more time. So Helena and Harrison sat on the porch steps, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and told the tale of the fence and the wolves and the beginning of their love. The story had been polished by repeated tellings, had taken on some of the qualities of myth and legend, but the essential truth remained unchanged. They had faced something terrifying together, had refused to give up or give in, and had emerged stronger and united. "Did you really fall in love while building the fence?" one of the twins asked, his young face serious. "Or did that come later?" Harrison and Helena looked at each other, and something passed between them, a silent communication built on decades of shared experience. "I fell in love while building the fence," Harrison said honestly. "Every time she picked up a post that was too heavy for her but refused to ask for help. Every time she kept working even though I could see she was exhausted. Every time she smiled at me like I was doing something heroic, when really I was just doing what needed to be done. I fell in love watching him work," Helena added, "watching him measure and dig and build with such care and precision. Watching him refuse to give up even when the ground was frozen and the work was brutal. Watching him look at me like I was someone worth saving, worth fighting for. But we fell in love with each other," Harrison continued, taking Helena's hand. "Not with some idealized version or some fantasy. We fell in love with the real person, flaws and all, and we chose to build a life together." The children accepted this explanation with the easy wisdom of the young, and the party continued into the evening, lit by lanterns and fireflies and the gentle glow of a half-moon. As the years advanced into the 1910s and beyond, Harrison and Helena aged with grace and dignity. Their hair went completely silver, their bodies moved more slowly, but their love remained as strong as ever. They still held hands while walking. They still kissed each other goodbye when parting. They still found reasons to laugh together every single day. When Harrison was 72, he was thrown from a spooked horse and broke his hip. The injury was serious, and for several months it seemed unclear whether he would recover fully. Helena nursed him through the difficult healing process with patience and devotion, and Harrison joked that turnabout was fair play since he had taken care of her during both of her pregnancies. He did recover, though with a permanent limp that he claimed gave him character. And he continued working with the horses, though he left more of the physical labor to Henry and the ranch hands, focusing instead on breeding decisions and training protocols. Helena developed arthritis in her hands that made writing difficult, but she adapted by dictating her lessons and correspondence to Anna, who visited regularly. The relationship between mother and daughter deepened during these sessions, as they talked about everything from veterinary medicine to politics to recipes, finding joy in each other's company. On an autumn day in 1920, 33 years after that terrifying night when wolves had driven Helena to the Silver Star Saloon, the couple sat together on their porch watching the sun set over the prairie they had called home for so long. "I have been thinking," Helena said, her voice soft with age but still clear. "When we die, I want to be buried here on the ranch, not in the town cemetery, but here, where we built our life." Harrison, who had been thinking similar thoughts, nodded, "Under the cottonwood tree by the creek. The one we had our first picnic under." "Yes," Helena agreed. "That is perfect." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Harrison said, "I am not ready yet, you understand. I plan on being around for quite a few more years. We still have grandchildren to spoil and great-grandchildren to meet." "I plan on being around too," Helena assured him. "But it is good to know that when the time comes, we will rest here together, in the place that has always been home." True to their determination, both Harrison and Helena lived well into their 80s, defying the statistics and expectations of frontier life. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a sprawling family tree that testified to the legacy of their love. Helena died first, peacefully in her sleep during the winter of 1928. She was 83 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Harrison held her hand as she passed, whispering his love and gratitude for all the years they had shared. The family buried her under the cottonwood tree as requested, marking the spot with a simple but elegant headstone that read, Helena Zimmerman Xavier, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher. She faced the wolves and won. Harrison grieved deeply but did not fall apart. He had their children and grandchildren to think about, and he knew Helena would have expected him to continue living fully until his own time came. He tended her grave daily, talking to her as if she were still beside him, sharing the news of the family and the ranch. He followed her 3 years later, dying quietly in his favorite chair on the porch, looking out over the land they had loved together. His last words were, "I am coming, Helena," and there was a smile on his face that suggested he could already see her waiting. The family buried him beside his wife under the cottonwood tree, his headstone reading, Harrison Xavier, beloved husband, father, grandfather, and rancher. He built a fence and found a home. The Double X Ranch continued under Henry's management, and then under the management of Henry's sons, and eventually under Henry's grandson. Each generation added their own improvements and innovations, but they all maintained certain traditions. The fence that Harrison built, or at least the fence line he established, was religiously maintained. The ornate gate with the initials remained at the main entrance, and every child born into the family was told the story of the wolves and the fence and the love that had built their legacy. The cottonwood tree grew large and provided shade over the 2 graves, and family members made a habit of visiting on anniversaries and special occasions, bringing flowers and sitting for a while to remember and give thanks. The wolves never returned, not in all the decades that followed. Old-timers in Kingfisher would occasionally tell the story to newcomers, usually met with skepticism, but those who had been there that winter of 1887 never doubted. They had seen Helena's terror, had witnessed Harrison's determination, had watched the transformation of 2 desperate people into a loving, successful family. The story of the wolves and the fence became part of Oklahoma folklore, embellished and romanticized over the years, but always returning to the essential truth, that love and courage and stubborn determination could overcome any obstacle, even those that seemed supernatural in origin. And in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, where the Double X Ranch still operated more than a century after Helena first ran terrified into the Silver Star Saloon, people still spoke of Harrison and Helena Xavier as the gold standard of what a partnership should be. They had faced the darkness together and emerged victorious. They had built not just a fence, but a legacy that would endure for generations. Their love story, born from fear and forged in determination, remained a testament to the power of standing firm, of refusing to give up, and of finding strength in another person when your own seems insufficient. It was a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most difficult circumstances, and that true love is not about grand gestures alone, but about showing up every day and doing the work necessary to build something lasting and true. The fence still stood, though repaired and replaced in sections over the decades. The land still flourished under the care of their descendants. And somewhere in whatever place spirits go to rest, Helena and Harrison Xavier remained together, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure in the hearts and minds of all who came after them.